If there is a way out of this, there has to be. The solution I hope to see is one that comes from honoring the humans involved, from looking at this from the humanitarian angle, not the political angle.
Hi, I'm Phoebe Maltz Bovy, opinion editor of the Canadian Jewish News. You're listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the CJN that looks at the complicated place of Jews in today's cultural and political landscapes. My guest today is Marsha Lederman. Marsha is an opinion columnist for the Globe and Mail and author of best-selling memoir about Holocaust memory, Kiss the Red Stairs. Her latest book is called October 7th, Searching for the Humanitarian Middle. It's a collection of her essays about Jewish identity from before and after the Hamas attacks. It's very hard to read this book, but it's a really important book, both in just sort of documenting what each of these sort of micro eras really felt like at the time. And also, I think, just in sort of modeling consistent values about, valuing human life, speaking both in sort of specific and general terms, like that those aren't contradictory, having your own specific personal family history, and also relating to other people as human beings. And yeah, all of this I thought was really great. Marsha, welcome to The Jewish Angle.
Thanks so much for having me and for reading the book and disseminating it in that way, Phoebe. I appreciate it.
So I wanted to ask you first, just sort of what prompted you to write this book?
Well, the idea was to put in one place sort of a contemporaneous lens on what that first year was like, because it goes from October 7th, 2023 to 2024, October 7th, as well as you pointed out, some writing before that I think lays out some of the groundwork for and provides some context for what came next. The idea really was to get it down. Like, this was a piece of history that we lived through. We're still living through it, unfortunately. Even having written those pieces, when I sat down to put this together, I was surprised by how much I'd forgotten, especially from those early days and how raw everything felt. I don't know if it's just that we've become used to feeling this traumatized and upset by what's been going on, or if the shock of it at the beginning was something that my body has tried to forget. I don't know, but that was kind of the idea of putting it together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what do you mean when you write about the humanitarian middle? It's in the subtitle of your book, and it's also something you write about in the book. But for listeners who may not have yet read your book, what do you mean by that expression?
At some point, I kept trying to explain how I was feeling to people. This was and has been and remains a huge topic of conversation in so many aspects of my life, personally and professionally. And at some point, I started describing it as coming at this from the humanitarian middle, where I am mourning in shock about what happened on October 7th, desperately sad for the hostages, but also desperately sad and upset about the war in Gaza and the innocent victims of that, where I can be appalled by the actions of the Israeli government and still care for the country, for the people who live there, for Israelis, where I can despise Hamas, which I do, but care deeply for Palestinians, where I can believe that Israel has a right to exist, but disagree with the current government and with the war as it stands now. Being in a place where I'm not on one quote unquote side of this, where I am wading through so many truths that may seem contradictory to anyone who views things as black and white, but I don't think are contradictory. And also, I recognize that the term humanitarian might sound actually ludicrous at this point. We're not seeing much in the way of anything being humanitarian. We have got a catastrophe on our hands. But I think that if there is a way out of this, there has to be a way out of this. The solution I hope to see is one that comes from, this may sound very sanctimonious, but from honoring the humans involved, from looking at this from the humanitarian angle, not the political angle or the military angle. Again, this might all sound naive, but this is where I am.
Well,
And I'm
I like it. I like the expression a lot, and I like it precisely because it's more specific than something like politically homeless or centrist or, you know, heterodox or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there are all sorts of phrases that exist to describe not being on one extreme or another. But I feel like adding humanitarian in there gets it what it is about the extremes you're rejecting. That it's not that you're trying to sort of um, contradict people on both sides, is that you're consistently honest for certain values. You know what I mean? Like, I think that that's why it's a useful term. And I was thinking about it specifically just so I live in Roncesvalles in Toronto, where there's regularly this sort of graffiti off, although it's not all graffiti. Some of it is, there's like somebody writes in huge letters on the sidewalk, "Free Palestine." And then somebody else comes in and with spray paint changes it to a different four-letter word starting with an F, and it just keeps going back and forth. It seems like the positions that are not represented necessarily by that back and forth are kind of hard to find in a way. So yeah, I don't know if that's if I'm bringing it too far afield with that graffiti, but it's just something I was thinking about, this sort of missing humanitarian middle.
No, it's
Yeah.
super interesting. If I can just say, when you were starting to tell that story, I was sure it was going to go a different way. That the second person or group or whoever is out there with the paint uh, wrote from Hamas under Free Palestine, because I've seen a lot of that here in Vancouver. There are graffiti offs here as well. Um, but that's really disturbing. And as I say, or wrote in the book, I mean, I am pro-Palestinian and I am Jewish and I believe in a state of Israel.
Well, you call yourself Zionist and pro-Palestinian, and I don't think that that's inconsistent. I consider myself both of those things too, so I don't find that inconsistent. But um,
But
I feel yeah,
the term Zionist has become, basically a slur, and I don't think, you can be a Zionist. You can believe that Jews have a right to a homeland, uh, and also believe that Palestinians have a right to a homeland and to safety and security and food and dignity and their lives too. Um, so yeah, that's part of this jumble of being in the middle.
absolutely. So I have an opinion writer to opinion writer question that just kept coming to mind because so I write a weekly opinion column for the CJN. I also do a freelance column in the Globe and Mail that's specifically not Jewish topics. When I write about Jewish topics, I'm taking for granted that my audience, my intended audience, is people who understand certain things baseline, who appreciate certain things baseline. And it's different, I would imagine, from writing about these same topics for a general audience, a general Canadian audience. Obviously, granted, the internet, anybody can be reading anything. But I was wondering like whether it's maybe harder in some ways, sort of psychically harder to write about some of this for a general audience. Yeah, like certain things. It just came through like certain sort of disclaimers or something where it's clear you're talking to a different person than I'm talking to. Um, and I just found this kind of interesting, even when I feel like very aligned with the things or something like, oh wow, well, like I wouldn't have thought I needed to spell that out. But so what was it like writing through all of this time opinion pieces about Jewish identity, not specifically for a Jewish audience?
Well, that's a great question. So
Thank you.
first of all, I when going back to that first weekend, that Thanksgiving weekend in 2023 when the attacks happened, I questioned whether I should be weighing in at all. My job is to write opinion columns, but did I need to recuse myself from having an opinion about this because I was Jewish, um, because I had family in Israel? Uh, and I mean, it seems crazy now to even think about that. I don't know how many columns I've written about this since, but I did ask that question. And I also asked myself if I wanted to weigh in, because I knew it was going to be a minefield, and it has been. Um, but I have, and you know them, very good editors who really help me shape not what to say, but how often I needed to weigh in and when it was time to write about something else. And I also have editors who work with me, and if they're coming from a much more mainstream background, and they'll tell me if they don't get something. But I am definitely writing not specifically for a Jewish audience or a Muslim audience. I'm writing for Canadians, and I'm approaching everything, I think, as a human being. I write this, I'm a mother before I'm anything else. That is the first thing I am. When I see children that are hungry, when I see families having to be or being displaced by bombings, when I see innocent people killed, I'm seeing that as a mother. That is my very first response. So that's how I'm coming at it. Um, so yeah, there have been very few times, I guess, where I've had to sort of dial it back. Um, but in the book itself, the publisher asked me to include a short history of the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I I I would tell anyone who asked, it's very hard to write a short history of this, but
Yes, I was very impressed with your synthesis there of rather a lot of not at all contentious material.
not at all. Even research. So first of all, I feel like we not we, but I had known so much of this. I was brought up with it. I learned about it from a very specific point of view. Uh, so when I went to write it down and, confirm things and look for different points of view, it was amazing how many different points of view are presented as fact. So sorry, I'm getting way off topic here, but that context was really important, I think, in the book because many people don't know about all of this. They're not brought up in a house where everyone's talking about it all the time, which was the case in my house.
It's also interesting. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot about this, but more from studying it, like in grad school, than from. I don't think my household was much chatting about it, but well, some of the stuff, like the sort of like the Holocaust aspect, yes, the founding of the state of Israel and Herzl and Nakba and all of that sort of back and forth, sort of. I'm very coherent here on this. Reading about the different Israeli and Palestinian perspectives, that is something that definitely came later. But I was wondering whether, just generally, from your columns, whether you get more pushback from the left or the right, to generalize.
I get it from all sides, and it can be really personal and mean. And I get that people are passionate about this. I understand. And me getting mean emails is the least of the concerns in what's happening right now. But I have, I received a very long email yesterday from a Jewish person who is very upset that I have been critical of Israel. Um, Someone who it wasn't a mean email, it was a really passionate email saying, as a Jewish person who has this platform in the mainstream media, I should be kinder to Israel, essentially, which I reject. And then I also received a really mean email. This was mean from someone who's actually written to me several times. And basically, he uses the term, if it is a he tells me to stop bleating about anti Semitism, bleating being what a sheep does. It feels misogynist to me. I'm not sure that that person would say that to a man.
They
Um,
wouldn't. They wouldn't. No.
yeah.
Yeah.
And basically, he wrote, when Netanyahu stops what he's doing, then the anti Semitism will end. If I cared enough to write back to this person, I would say anti Semitism is not justified by the actions of a government of another country in which I do not live. Anti Semitism is not okay because Israel is doing something that is wrong.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, Muslim and Jewish communities in Canada have been torn apart.
I've known you for 20 years. You've been at my house for Shabbat supper, I don't know how many times. And for 1 second, you can't put down your friend and just hold my hand?
We're fed a constant stream of Jews and Muslims talking at each other, about each other, but rarely do we hear them talking to each other.
There was, why are you doing this? What's the benefit of doing this?
This podcast aims to do something different. I'm Avi Feingold, a rabbi and a writer with the Canadian Jewish News.
I'm Yafa Sakeja, a Canadian-Palestinian entrepreneur and volunteer with the Canadian Friends of Standing Together.
We're sitting down with Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians, from coast to coast and across the political divide, having difficult conversations in good faith.
We are not the Israeli government. Palestinians are not Hamas.
This is the place where we're both supposed to end up, Israeli and Palestinian, Arab and Jewish.
Subscribe to In Good Faith, wherever you listen to podcasts.
As liberal Zionist Jews appealing to more conservative or more hawkish ones, and I think we both fall into this category, it can be tempting to, when you see something horrible happening in Gaza, your thoughts are going to go to horrible things that have happened in the past to Jews. And I think that that's because that is our community's internal reference point. You yourself use the phrase never again in this context. There's also, though, this danger once you go outside the Jewish sphere, and you write about this, a danger of speaking about Israeli misdeeds as akin to Nazism. You know what I'm saying? Like the saying, like, if Israel's done something bad, it's not just Israel is a country that has done something bad. It is, these are the new Nazis. The Jews are the new Nazis. The Jewish country's the new Nazi Germany. That's the rhetoric. I'm just wondering how you would sort of grapple with that, right? Because I think that is going to be, like, for people like us, that is going to be our reference point. If you think about a population going through something terrible, even if you're blaming Hamas for it, it's still terrible. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it sounds like you and I are both grappling in many ways. First of all, I think that I believe that I, as a person whose parents survived the Holocaust, have a special obligation to speak out when I see something wrong, when I see injustice. And so that does inform how I have spoken out. But at the same time, comparing Israel to the Nazis, well, this is known as Holocaust inversion, right?
Mhm.
It is, it's really offensive. It's inaccurate. And I think it is, I'm not sure if it's meant to be triggering, but it certainly is triggering. And it's certainly not helping anything. What's happening right now is terrible in and of itself. It doesn't need to be compared to the Holocaust. And it's not the Holocaust. It is a different tragedy. It is a different catastrophe. That said, I do feel that my background as two Holocaust survivors' daughter really compels me to speak out against both, against what's happening to Palestinians. It's so wrong. It's so awful. And against the sickening anti-Semitism and rhetoric that is being used against people who have suffered their own tragedy. And by that, I mean the Jewish people. You can, like, absolutely, Israel is worthy of criticism. But to say Israel's waging their own Holocaust, or Benjamin Netanyahu is Adolf Hitler, that is provocative and not necessary. And as I said, it's probably meant to offend, and it does. It really
Well,
does.
it certainly doesn't help people calmly sort things out.
No, and it's
If
hard to be.
nothing else, yeah.
I know it's hard to be calm about this. I get that, but you asked me about why this book. Really, I was hoping that it could help people have conversations, people who might not be from the same quote unquote side of things, that we could talk instead of yelling at each other, Nazi, or whatever. So I hope that we can have these conversations. And I think it's possible. Is it going to help matters? I, Benjamin Netanyahu is not listening to me, nor is Hamas, but I think it will help if those of us who are, in the humanitarian middle and care about humanity, can speak to one another and try to find a way to speak to one another, not at one another, about this mess.
No, I think that makes sense. And something I really appreciated in your book is so your background is in reviewing like cultural events, cultural products, arts reviews, things like writing about the arts. And I really liked how you didn't treat it as somehow taking one side or another to allow an artist to speak, to allow an artist to make their work. You know what I mean? I think your defense of artistic expression consistently across, Jews' artistic expression, Palestinians' artistic expression, the artistic expression of people with different politics, I thought was consistent and really strong and really important, because a lot of people will be very supportive of the artistic expression of the people whose politics they like, but a little less so um, of the ones they don't. But the part of your book that I think will probably stay with me the most, maybe actually the 2012 article about the photographer Fred Herzog, because the rest of the material, I mean, I read your columns, I live in this moment, I am familiar with it, but I was sort of jolted to this other whole world of somebody who, for his own family reasons / his own misguided readings, landed on basically Holocaust denialism. And I wondered, so what I wanted to ask you about that specifically was what it was like rereading that essay now at a time when Nazi sympathizers are not as fringe, I think, as they were in 2012. I remember 2012, and they were pretty fringe then. With like X being as it is and all of that.
So, first of all, just to go back to what you said about artists and artistic expression, right away after October 7th, Palestinian artists in particular, writers in particular, were maybe silenced is too strong a word, but they were certainly disinvited from places. And that made me very upset and was absolutely wrong. As things evolved, we saw Jewish artists also excluded from certain spaces, which is also very wrong. And I will continue to fight for anyone who has art to make about this moment or about their history or experience or about anything, to be able to have their say. Now, to Fred Herzog, I think if that happened today and I published that article today, I think I would be slammed even more than I was when it first came out in 2012. The comments on the article, which no longer exist because I tried to find them for this book, were really disturbing. there was a lot of get over it already. I was accused of engineering the interview to make him say these things so that I could write about my family history in the newspaper. I mean, ludicrous things like that. And I actually think I was really fair with him. I really tried to figure out what would make him look for those answers. What would make him want to think something other than what we know to be fact about what Germany did during that time. And I think that's actually a relevant thing to think about right now in this moment. Because I think a lot of people are grappling for ways to understand how, in my case, how a country I was raised to care about very deeply could be doing what it's doing right now.
I just have one more question for you, which is once again a sort of writer to writer question, even though the book I'm writing is not on remotely as serious a topic, but I am aware of how things go in nonfiction. There's a certain amount of overlap, which is that when you write nonfiction about current events, it's tricky because events change in real time. So I'm wondering basically, like, I mean, there's just been so much happening both on the ground in the Middle East and, Trump, all of these different things. And I know you wrote about some of this for the Globe and Mail as well, but just in case people have not read that column yet, in case you have other things you would want to add about that, I was just wondering, like, if you were doing we're recording this on September 4th. If you were doing a September 4th, 2025 afterword, what would the gist of it be?
It would be somewhat like a piece I wrote a couple of weeks ago about what it's like to put this book out at this time. When I wrote this book, I wrote the columns, but when we put the book together and with all the context, we did update things, not within the columns themselves, but we added context before each column, what was happening in the war, and footnotes to explain things that had developed since then. When this was happening, I was not certain, but I thought the war was going to be over by the time this book came out in August of 2025. So the September 4th, 2025 afterword is, I can't believe we're still here. I am beyond distressed. I want to pull the covers up over my head and I want this to go away. That's not going to happen. So that's why I've put this out, so we can have these conversations. And I remain hopeful for humanity in spite of it all.
Marsha Lederman, thank you so much for your book.
Thanks. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Jewish Angle, a podcast from the Canadian Jewish News. This has been Phoebe Maltz Bovy, opinion editor of the CJN and a contributing editor of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's print magazine. The show is produced and edited by Michael Fraiman. Our music is by Frank Freeman. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to The Jewish Angle wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.